The story of Andrei Chikatilo, the Rostov Ripper, is a chilling account of one of the most brutal and prolific serial killers in modern history. His reign of terror gripped the Soviet Union, leaving behind a legacy of fear and pain that endures to this day. Chikatilo's crimes were not only heinous in their execution, but also revealed the terrifying reality of a man who, beneath a seemingly ordinary exterior, harbored a monstrous darkness. This article delves into the horrifying life and acts of a killer who preyed on the most vulnerable and evaded justice for years. Don't forget to leave us a comment, subscribe, and give us a like. The name Andrei Chikatilo sends shivers down the spine of anyone familiar with the horrifying reality of his crimes. Known as the Rostov Ripper, or the Butcher of Rostov, Chikatilo was one of the most notorious serial killers in the world, responsible for a decade-long murder spree that claimed over 50 lives. His reign of terror in the late Soviet Union during the 1980s and early 1990s left families shattered and the entire region gripped with fear. What made Chikatilo's story even more terrifying was how he managed to maintain the facade of an ordinary man, all while hiding monstrous impulses and a thirst for violence. Andrei Chikatilo was born on October 16, 1936, in the small village of Yablushny in Ukraine, during a time when the country was ravaged by famine and poverty due to Soviet collectivization policies. His childhood was anything but normal. He grew up in extreme poverty, often hungry, and lived under the shadow of stories about the brutal cannibalism that took place during the Great Famine. One of the most disturbing tales he grew up with was that of his older brother, who, according to his mother, had been kidnapped and eaten by starving neighbors. Whether this story was true or a means to scare Andrei into submission, it left a profound scar on his fragile psyche. Chikatilo was an awkward and shy child, often bullied by his peers for his timid nature and frequent bedwetting. Despite his desire for companionship, he remained isolated, further fueling his feelings of inadequacy. As a young adult, his struggles continued. Chikatilo battled with impotence and sexual dysfunction, which would become significant factors in his later crimes. After several failed attempts at higher education and holding down steady jobs, Chikatilo eventually became a teacher. It was during his time as a school teacher that the first signs of his deviant behavior surfaced. He was accused of molesting young girls but managed to evade serious consequences, allowing his dark urges to fester and grow. In 1978, the violence inside him finally erupted. His first known victim was a 9-year-old girl named Lena Zakotnova, whom he lured into an abandoned house under the pretense of showing her toys. Once inside, Chikatilo attacked her, stabbing her repeatedly and mutilating her body. After the murder, he threw her corpse into a nearby river. Despite leaving clear evidence behind, including bloodstains, Chikatilo was not immediately arrested. Another man was falsely accused, convicted, and eventually executed for the crime. A miscarriage of justice that allowed Chikatilo to continue his killings for years. From 1982 to 1990, Chikatilo's murderous spree escalated. He roamed train stations, parks, and bus stops, preying on women and children. His victims were often the vulnerable, runaways, prostitutes, orphans, and others he could easily overpower. Chikatilo would lure them to secluded areas, promising food, money, or companionship. Once isolated, he would unleash his pent-up rage. His method of killing was brutal and sadistic, stabbing his victims repeatedly, often in a frenzied state, mutilating their bodies, and sometimes even cannibalizing parts of them. Many of his victims had their eyes gouged out, a chilling ritual that Chikatilo claimed was due to his belief that his victims' eyes would haunt him after death. The murders shocked the Soviet Union, a nation already burdened by political turmoil and economic hardships. The authorities launched massive manhunts, but the police were initially unable to catch Chikatilo, partly due to the lack of modern forensic methods in Soviet-era investigations. The sheer scale of his crimes and the randomness of his victims made it difficult to find patterns, and for years the Rostov Ripper remained a mystery. Despite being arrested in 1984 for suspicious behavior, Chikatilo was released after a brief investigation, as the police had no hard evidence linking him to the murders. This was yet another blunder that allowed him to continue his deadly rampage. His confidence grew with each new killing, and he began to believe that he was invincible, that no one could stop him. However, his arrogance would eventually lead to his downfall. In November 1990, after acting suspiciously near a train station where the body of a young boy had been found, Chikatilo was arrested once again. This time, police had gathered enough evidence to keep him in custody. During a brutal interrogation, Chikatilo confessed to the murders of 56 people, providing shocking and detailed accounts of his gruesome acts. His confessions left investigators and the public horrified by the sheer scale of his atrocities. Chikatilo's trial in 1992 was one of the most infamous in Soviet and post-Soviet history. Held in a cage to protect him from the enraged families of his victims, Chikatilo sat cold and emotionless as he recounted his crimes in front of a horrified audience. His attempts to plead insanity were rejected by the court, as psychiatrists found him to be fully aware of his actions. He was sentenced to death for his crimes, a fitting end for one of the worst serial killers in history. In 1994, Andrei Chikatilo was executed by a single gunshot to the head, bringing an end to the terror he had inflicted upon the Soviet Union for over a decade. Yet even after his death, his story remains a grim reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly ordinary people. Chikatilo's crimes shock the world and stand as a chilling testament to the depths of human depravity, as well as the tragic failures of a system that allowed such a monster to slip through the cracks for so many years. Don't forget to leave us a comment, subscribe, and give us a like.